Explaining the Russian Civil War. In 1917, during World War I, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, or Vladimir Lenin, and the Bolshevik Party would take power in Russia during the October Revolution. This would throw the nation into chaos and would cause multiple groups across the nation to declare their independence from the old empire. Notably, there was Finland, Poland, Ukraine, the Cossacks, the Caucasian states, and the Baltic states. When the Bolsheviks would make peace with the Germans in 1918, many of these new states would come under German influence. Many of these new nations would go on to fight their own civil wars and would go on to fight wars against other new nations. Meanwhile, in Russia, many groups would begin to rise up against the Bolsheviks. Monarchists, Republicans, foreign volunteers, and many other anti-Bolshevik groups would form alliances with the regionalists to form the White Movement. In early 1918, the Whites under Alexander Kolchak would establish their government in the east. The first battle would take place in the northern Caucasus, where the White Army had large support from the Cossacks. While this was going on, peasants defending their villages would form green armies, and anarchists would form black armies. In May of 1918, the Bolsheviks would prevent the Czechoslovak Legion from fighting their Austrian enemies on their front. Because of this, the Legion would revolt and would take many important cities along the Trans-Siberian Railway. Now fearing that Tsar Nikolai II would be rescued, the Bolsheviks would have him executed in July. To make things worse for the Bolsheviks, the Allied powers, who wanted to reopen the Eastern Front, would launch an invasion on Russia. They would begin to move in through Central Asia, the Caucasus, the North, and large parts of the Far East. So, after the peace with the Germans, the Allied invasions, and the White Army's advances, the Bolsheviks really only held power in the Western industrial cities. However, they did hold support all over. However, in November of 1918, World War I would come to an end, and Eastern Europe's borders would be redrawn, throwing it into chaos once again. The Allied powers, minus Japan, would slowly withdraw their troops from Russia. Seeing this as an opportunity, the Bolsheviks would launch an offensive as far west as Poland. They wanted to export their revolution to Europe. This was possible because Leon Trotsky, an important member of the Bolshevik Party, would introduce forced conscription, increasing the size of the Red Army to around 1 million men. Plus, unlike the White Movement, they had a united command. However, despite this, in March of 1919, this offensive would end in failure, with them only really capturing Belarus. In the east, they would have more success, as they would push back Kolchak's advance in April. Throughout the rest of the year, they would continue to push them farther and farther east. However, in the south, General Anton Denikin would begin a push to try and reach Moscow. At the same time, General Nikolai Yudenich would begin a push on Petrograd along with the Estonians. Denikin would make quick advances, so in October of 1919, the Bolsheviks would make an alliance with the Black Army in Ukraine. The Black Army would cut off Denikin's overstretched supply lines, forcing him to retreat. This allowed the Bolsheviks to stop the assault on Petrograd and to regain lost land in the south. At the beginning of 1920, the Bolsheviks would recognize that they could not defeat the Baltic states, and so they would later recognize their independence. Meanwhile, in the east, the Whites were all but defeated, and so they would hand over Kolchak to be executed. To appease Japan, Vladimir Lenin would create a buffer state known as the Far Eastern Republic. In the south, Peter Wrangel became head of the White Army. However, by that point, the White Army could no longer continue fighting both the Red Army and the Black Army. With an army 1 million men strong, and the Whites now on the retreat, the Bolsheviks would attack Azerbaijan, securing their oil reserves. However, the Polish and the Ukrainians would make an alliance and launch an offensive on the Bolsheviks, hoping to regain the old Ukrainian state. In May, they would capture Kyiv. However, they would be met by the numerically superior Red Army. The Red Army counterattack would push deep into Poland. However, this counterattack would be halted at the Battle of Warsaw. Poland would sue for peace with the Bolsheviks, putting it under a guarantee of independence from the Bolsheviks. However, this treaty would also place Ukraine and Belarus firmly under Bolshevik control. Then, in late 1920, the remnants of the White Army would begin to flee en masse. This would allow Lenin to break his treaty with the Black Army and begin to attack them. In August of 1921, Nestor Makhno, the leader of the Black Army, would flee to Romania, ending the Black Army's involvement in the war. During the winter of 1920 and 1921, the Bolsheviks would invade Armenia and Georgia and would crush the White Army supporters within Mongolia. The Japanese would eventually withdraw from Siberia, and the Russians would invade the Far Eastern Republic in 1922, annexing it, finally bringing an end to the Russian Civil War. In conclusion, the Russian Civil War was a civil war which took place within Russia, which was a bunch of fighting between a bunch of different groups caused by the Bolshevik takeover of Russia. This war would also see the establishment of the new Soviet Union. Thank you for watching this video on the Russian Civil War.